Hello, and welcome to this, our 88th live stream. Popcorn is at the gates. Now, we were kind of torn here between, naming this live stream after Friday the 13th, or the fact that we have a popcorn video coming out this coming Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. So we went with the popcorn, although we do love Friday the 13th also. So, we are going to, again, it's going to be a great party. It's going to be a premiere, so we're going to show the video. Again, the popcorn keeps its secrets until the very end, even though apparently it did leak by accident. And yet, we are in the spirit of popcorn. He has kept the secret, and we will, do that. And when the popcorn review goes live, then you know what it's about. So again, it's this Monday, which is, I believe, the 16th. Just check. Yep, Monday the 16th at 8 p.m. Pacific time. So with that said, we're going to get into your questions. And not a lot of questions tonight so far, not a lot of super chats, so it might be a short night. That would be a pleasant surprise. Then again, every time we've said that, it's been almost a 5-hour marathon session, so it all depends on how much you want to torment me, I guess. Just remember, I do have to go to work tomorrow. Okay? So, let's get into the questions. Now, I'm actually going to take a last-minute question that just came up, just because I think it's so interesting and I don't want to lose it. So I hope it caught it. Okay. Here it is by Saint Ronan. I think this is actually a really good question. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Oh, I should have said what the rules are. We always start with the rules. Rules are super chats have priorities. We do also take non-super chats. If you're going to do a non-super chat, we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of it, like Saint Ronan has done here. We also ask that you only ask the question once, so I don't get confused as I scan through the list. And we also ask if it has to do with a passage in the Bible or a foreign language, that you include some context. In the case of a passage from the Bible, include what book it's from, chapter and verse. And if it's a language, tell me what you think it means and what language it's from. So again, just to give me a little bit of context here, so I don't get confused with something else, like a homonym in another language. So anyway, with that said, let's get to the questions. And we're going to start tonight with 4 non-super chats. But this one caught my eye last minute, so this is a cool question. And he asks, Saint Ronan asks, "Good evening, Dr. Falk. I've just started to read Against Heresies by Saint Irenaeus. Great book. I've read it cover to cover. So yeah, absolutely. It's 5 books actually, but it's excellent. In the introduction, he says his dialectic is prolix. What does that mean?" Ooh, you're going to find out what that means. He basically is saying that he is wordy to excess. Okay? That's what prolix means. That his dialectic, which means basically a back and forth. So the way Against Heresies is structured is he is going to explain the other side, the various heresies he's dealing with, in excruciating detail. It's just crazy how much detail he's going to go into. And it's going to be 40, 50 pages of him explaining what the heresy is saying before he actually does his critique. And it really gets to the point of where the description gets so over the top. It's very funny. It's a great read. I loved reading Irenaeus. Um, I loved it. It was very humorous, but it does require a certain amount of attention, and that's what he means by it being prolix. Is that it's wordy to excess, and he is very wordy. But then again, too, um, at the same time, almost all the church fathers have that sort of mentality where they are using a lot of words and expecting you to be able to retain 30, 40 pages of argumentation in your head while you read this. This would seem to be a standard mode of literature and reading capability that people had in the early Christian era. So this stuff is not written for a Twitter generation. Okay, it really isn't. If you have time, if you have a hard time concentrating on 180 characters, yeah, you're going to struggle with Irenaeus. Okay, because he's gonna expect you to retain the argument of 50 pages before it gets into the argument. And this is ubiquitous across patristic sources. It's all across the board. I mean, you find the same thing in Tertullian. Tertullian basically in his Against Noetus is the same deal. Well, he'll talk about a modalist for 40 pages and then do his critique. Some people will, not understanding how patristic literature is written, will think, hey, Tertullian's a modalist. Because, right in the throw of this, it's talking about modalism. Well, he's explaining Noetus's ideas. But they do it in such a verbose, detailed fashion. We really don't write this way anymore. We don't really write this way anymore. We tend to be very brief. Publishers today don't like publishing long books. Readers today don't like reading long books. They want the arguments, they want you to get to the point, and they want you to get out. So that's what it means, is he's very, very wordy. Okay? So anyway, thank you for the question. Very interesting question, and it's a very interesting discussion on Irenaeus and Against All Heresies. And I highly recommend it. It can be tough to read. Okay? All patristic literature can be tough to read. But if you want to really get into those patristic sources, you sort of gotta acclimatize yourself to being able to sit down and just slog through long pieces of text. And that's just what you have to do if you want to deal with a patristic source. So anyway, thank you for the question. Interesting question. Our next question is from a warrior of the Most High. And he asks, who was Vizier Aper-El? Could he be Moses? It's a theory that I recently heard on Discovery Channel. Oh, Discovery Channel. No. Aper-El is not Moses. Okay, now there's several reasons why Aper-El isn't Moses. But let's begin with who is Aper-El. Aper-El was the vizier under King Akhenaten. And he was an Asiatic Semite. Okay? It appears that he started from, say, the lower classes, probably the slave strata, and managed to work his way up to being vizier. So he was able to, jump the strata. It was possible. Very difficult to do, but it was possible. And he ascended to the highest, basically the second highest ranking office. Now, he's not the only Semitic Asiatic to ever achieve the rank of vizier. But he is one of the more famous. He's definitely one of the more famous. Now, why is he not Moses? The reason is because he never left Egypt. His tomb was found. He died around age 50-ish, roughly around there. The tomb of his wife, Taweret, has been discovered. And even more so, the tomb of his son, Hui, has also been discovered. So the whole Aper-El family remained in Egypt. So there was no exodus for the Aper-El family. They served Akhenaten faithfully. He got married, he had children, and he died in Egypt. So, it's not a theory that has legs. There's too many counterfactuals here for this to be actually a good candidate for Moses. Which is okay, because Akhenaten's a really poor candidate for the Pharaoh of the Exodus too. So, but again, it's cosmetic similarities here between Joseph and say Aper-El that sort of gravitates to making these comparisons. And since Joseph is way too early, they'll just say, well, it had to be Moses. Well, yeah, it doesn't work. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Interesting question. And Aper-El's an interesting guy. I am looking forward to the final publication of that tomb, too. It should be very interesting. So we'll see what happens with that. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay, our next one is from Lion Green. Did the ancient Egyptians have messianic expectations? Somewhat. Now, the problem the Egyptians saw with society is when society lost its sense of order, its sense of ma'at, sense of balance. And it's under those conditions when social upheaval happens that the Egyptians undergo the most distress. So you do get, say, prophecies like the prophecy of Nefertiti, which predicts the coming of a king Ameni. Now, this is actually political propaganda meant to support Middle Kingdom bureaucracy and the new regime of Amenemhat I. Okay? But later Egyptians are going to take those texts and read them and basically say, oh, there's these evil Semites running around the land, creating chaos. They're going to water their herds where they shouldn't. Egypt is going to be in turmoil. Slaves are going to get rich while the nobles are going to end up being poor. Cats marry dogs. Things are going to rain from heaven. That's sort of the Egyptian idea. Chaos is the Egyptian idea of the worst that could happen. So, on occasions when this happened, they did have an expectation that a savior king would come, restore order, and punish those dang Semites. Okay? Now, that didn't always materialize. But when, for example, King Ahmose I drove out the Hyksos, many Egyptians did see that as a fulfilled prophecy, where the prophesied king would come, drive out the Semites, or at least control them, and restore order to the land. So that's a yes, but it's a very restrictive yes. It's pretty much clear that, say, after the 19th dynasty, after the second, basically, essentially after the Exodus, that's when we get, about mid-Dynasty 19 is when we see the last sort of big batch of prophetic, copies of prophetic literature. Now, one of the things is, when Messianic expectations among Egyptians were high, they made a lot of copies of these prophecies, these Middle Kingdom prophecies. And we find in the New Kingdom 2 points where we find a lot of copies of, say, Nefertiti. The first is at the beginning of Dynasty 18. No surprise, that's Akhmosa. But what's a little more interesting is that the second sort of batch of these copies of Middle Kingdom prophecies occurs mid-Dynasty 19, right when we would expect the Exodus. So that's a very interesting coincidence. Coincidence. Okay, so, but after that, after Dynasty 19, we don't get any more copies of these Middle Kingdom texts. They sort of run their course. So after mid-Dynasty 19, people start to lose that idea of Messianic expectation. And part of it is that the king of Egypt loses its status as, say, the God King, say, a divinely appointed entity. And it really becomes, at the end of Dynasty 20, at the end of Dynasty 20, the kingship loses its cachet, and Egypt becomes more of a theocracy. And it's under that theocracy that all the Messianic expectations evaporate, essentially. So that's probably the limit to Messianic expectations, is that they're expecting a king to come to save them, and to save them from the evil Semites and chaos. But that's more or less the extent of it. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very interesting question, and I hope that helped. Okay. And our final non-super chat here is from Kurt F. And he says, "Hello, Dr. Falk. In Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta, is the Aratta that's mentioned Ararat, Aratu? Thanks." Okay. The answer here is we don't really know. It's possible. It's also possible that this was an unknown place in Elam, which is more in Iran, almost on the far side of Mesopotamia, on the eastern side of Mesopotamia. So outside of Mesopotamia proper, but on the sort of the eastern side. So it could be anywhere from Elam all the way up to Afghanistan. So we don't know exactly where Aratta is. Some scholars think it's fictional, but we can't really pinpoint it, and that's the problem. So it could be Urartu, it could be somewhere in Elam. We don't know. So that's the best we have at the moment. Unlike the other, in that tale, it does mention a lot of cities that we do know, like I think Akkad is mentioned as well, or Sumer is mentioned. So there are cities in that tale that are mentioned that we do know, but Aratta is not one of them. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope that helped. That's at least that's the best as I recall it. It's been a long time since I've read it, so you'll have to forgive me if my memory here is not 100% of what the tale contains. However, we do, as far as I recall, we don't know the actual identification of Aratta. Okay. So with that said, we're now on to the super chats. The first super chat here is from Cam Britt for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, "You have mentioned having supernatural experiences. I seem to recall you referring to a shadow man." Oh, yes, I did. Any theories as to what that is? Ooh, there's lots of theories about shadow men. I know someone who has seen that where they work. Okay. Now, where I saw it was at work. The place where I work it's a retail store. It's a furniture store. It's also located in a 100-year-old heritage building. Now, you wouldn't know that walking into the front door. You would never know it's a heritage building. But you go underneath into the stock room, and it's very, very clear that the building is very, very old. You see 100-year-old timbers down there. I mean, it's very clear that this place is old. And when I first started working there, people were already talking about seeing things. Okay? One of the assistant managers, came down in the stockroom and broke down in tears because, she saw the ghost of a little girl. Other employees have reported that things fly off the shelves at them. One person reported hearing steps, and there's nobody in the store. I myself saw a shadowy figure at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. All the lights are on, and it's just walking in front of the lights as if, it's just a cloud of darkness. It was the strangest thing I saw at working there. And then a few weeks later, another person reports seeing something similar. Okay? So, there's a lot of phenomena happening in this particular little retail outlet. So, Cole Walker says, I'll take the Shadow Man, no little ghost for me. Yeah, it really freaked her out. Yeah, I think seeing a little girl ghost would be like too much too. Yeah, that one's. Now, there's a lot of theories as to what these phenomena could be. And when you got a building that old, it's got a lot of history. So, there are several possibilities it could be. Now, I'll take the least likely explanation first, which is its demonic manifestation. Now, perhaps the ghost girl is demonic manifestation. Shadow men are less likely to be. One of the things about the shadow men is they don't interact with anyone. They just appear, move for a little bit, and they disappear. So that's less likely to be demonic manifestation. And the reason why is because one of the things about demonic manifestations is that they really want to get you down a certain track of thinking so that they can kick the can down the road. This is not going to advance that agenda very well. Now, ghostly manifestations can, because they can interact. They can give you false doctrines. They can give you deceptions. There's really no deception with a shadow man. It's just a shadowy figure. Just you see it, it's gone.
It makes you believe in ghosts.
Well,
so it sets you up for other things.
It can, but it might not.
Well, nothing's supposed to return.
Yeah, but that's just it. There's other factors it could be. Okay? Now, one of the factors it could be is what's called sometimes phantasms of the living. This is a well-known phenomenon. In fact, there's a set of 3 books, I think, called something along the lines of Phantasms of the Living, where basically people manifest a spirit while alive. A manifestation that's alive, that while the person is alive. It's technically not a ghost.
Like a soul shadow.
So like a soul shadow, yeah. There's been reports of people who have been asleep, had a dream that they're walking down the hall, and their neighbor gets freaked out that they see a shadow man walking down the hall. One of the things about, say, poltergeists is that they're more common in high-stress environments. environments where you have a lot of stress, there tends to be a lot of telekinetic manifestations. We don't know why exactly. Tell you what, this little furniture store is a very high stress environment. Very high stress environment. People do dream about being at this job site when they're off the job. Heck, I dream about it. Because it is that sort of high stress environment. So, is this somebody walking through the store while they're dreaming? Who knows? But there's a lot of theories that surround this sort of manifestation. And we don't know which it is. And part of the reason we don't know which it is because these manifestations are non-responsive. You can't drive them out in the name of Jesus Christ. I tried. just to see if it would work. Nah, it didn't. And that's because they don't stay. They're there and they're gone. So, again, we don't know exactly why they manifest. It could be spirit of the living, basically a projection of oneself. It could be another example of theory of what it could be is a psychic imprint. Somebody who had been alive, had walked there, under a certain high stress situation, and then deceased, but it's imprinted upon the environment. And then there is, of course, say, spirits and higher powers. That's also a possibility, even though it's probably less likely in this case. One of the things I don't think it is the spirit of the deceased. That's one thing I don't think it is. Now, it's not that the dead can't communicate with you, it's that the dead... Scripture tells us that it is appointed unto men once to die, and then the judgment. Okay? So, it's not normative for people to come back from the dead, except in very exceptional circumstances. And it's really usually only temporary at that point. So I think that covers the scope of possibilities here. I'm not saying I know what it is. I'm just saying I've seen it. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and I hope that at least gave you the range of possibilities here. There's really a lot it could be, and we just don't have enough data to tell for sure. So, anyway, let's go on to the next super chat. Anyway, Cam, thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, the next super chat is from Rachel Schoenberger for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does Exodus 2:10 indicate that the Pharaoh's daughter knew Hebrew and should name Moses be interpreted as either having a Hebrew or an Egyptian etymology? Okay, let's pull up the passage just so we know what we're talking about here. So, Exodus 2, verse 10. Bible here. And the child grew, and let's go back to verse 9, get some context. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I shall give you your right wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now, this is a very, very interesting... the whole name of Moses is very interesting. Now, there is disagreement in Egyptology as to the meaning of Moses. Okay? Now, in Hebrew, Moses means to draw out, to pull out. Okay? But there's a play on words here. That Moshe here is a play on words. In Egyptian, one of the possibilities here for an Egyptian etymology is Mshe. We, for example, find a series of Mshe names in Egyptian, like Amun Mshe. Amun of the pool, or Montu Mshe, Montu of the pool. So that Mshe, Moshe, means from the pool. So she might actually be giving him an Egyptian name, but it has a sort of a similar meaning in Hebrew as well. So instead of being from the pool in the Egyptian, it's drawn out in Hebrew. So it's one of those things where it's got, say, this sort of resonant meaning. It's a resonant meaning. It's not directly related. The two are not etymologically related, but they resonate with each other. No, I don't think Tutmosis is related because it's a mess name. Now, Tutmosis, Jemuti, in the Egyptian is Jehuti Mes. Okay? Thoth has begotten. Okay? Now, there are Egyptologists that do believe that mess names are the root of Moses, but I think there's some etymological difficulties with that. There's like, for example, the Moses has a sheen in it, not a sibilant s, whereas the mess has only sibilant s's. So I don't think Tutmosis is related, but there could be a Jehuti Mshe that is, I think, possibly viable. So that's sort of, I hope that explains this. It is an interesting question. It's something I want to write an article on in my copious free time. I'd be doing a whole lot of writing if I was doing this full time, I tell you. But, you know, the Lord has not seen fit to allow me to do this full time, so I'm not doing much writing. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, or at least provided some insight into it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a great question. Okay, the next one here is from Tim Miara for £2 British. Thank you very much for the super chat. If Genesis 31:49 is a death threat, what is 1 Samuel 20:23? Interesting and perceptive question. We'll get into this. Both passages use exactly the same wording. The Lord is between you and me, which you said is an idiom for a death threat. Well, not quite. Not quite. I'll tell you what the idiom is, and then I'll tell you how 1 Samuel 20:23 differs. Let's go to Genesis 31. We won't take it in context because we just want the idiom here. Oops. Get the right chapter. 31. 49. And I think once we compare the two passages, it will be clear why one's a death threat and one isn't. Okay? So, verse 49. The idiom here is, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from the other. Or, in other words, when we are apart. Okay? Okay, now, let's take 1 Samuel 20:23. And you'll see the difference. (20:23). Okay. And he says, David says, look, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. Okay? Now, let's break this down. The part between the two passages that is the same is the Lord is between you and me. What differs is what comes at the end. When we are absent, versus forever. The idea here is that the Lord is a peacemaker. He's providing peace between two parties. David is saying to Jonathan, the Lord will be between you and me forever. There will be eternal peace between us. We are the bestest of friends. Laban is saying to Jacob, the Lord will be between you and me when we are apart. But if you come close, the Lord is not going to stop me from killing you. Okay? Okay? It's a very, very different meaning. That little bit at the end completely changes the meaning of this. Okay? So that's the difference. Okay? The difference is the one in 1 Samuel is basically saying we are friends forever. And the Lord will create peace between us forever. Genesis 31 basically says, the Lord's only going to keep peace if you stay the heck away. But if you get close, oh boy, watch out because I'm going to kill you. That's why it's a death threat. Okay? And that's the difference here. Is that little bit at the end. So anyway, I hope that explains this. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great question. It's a great question because the two passages are very similar. But again, it's that little slight nuance that just flips the whole meaning of it on its head. So while Laban's is a threat, basically David's is a commitment of everlasting friendship. But the meaning here is very, very slight. And you have to pay attention, close attention to the word.
So they get the wording wrong.
Yes, they typically, on the postal cards, you basically, on the little plaques you get at Christian bookstores, they usually use the version from Genesis 31. So, which is very unfortunate. Yeah. Very unfortunate. If they use the one from 1 Samuel 20, hey, that would be fantastic. I mean, that would actually, be more applicable. However, it doesn't sound as good to the English speaker's ear. That whole, may the Lord be between you and me whenever we're apart, just sounds a little better to the English ear. Yeah, it doesn't sound so good to the Hebrew ear. Just saying. Okay?
Not something you want to tell your beloved on your wedding day.
Yeah, not something you want to tell your beloved on your wedding day. Definitely not. Highly recommend against it.
First year anniversary.
So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is from Lion Green for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could the Aramaic section of Daniel, chapter 1-6, be dated early, while the chapter 7-12 is late? I tend to lean against that, but let's hear what you have to say also. What if the first half is an anthology of stories dated to the exile, compiled later in the 2nd century? Ooh. Yeah, 4 Qumran 242. Now, I'd have to look up that particular basically Dead Sea Scroll. However, one of the reasons I would say against this is even though 4Q 242 is a different recession, one of my thoughts on this is that we do find the Book of Daniel in the Septuagint. And the Septuagint does date to the 3rd century BC. So that would at least sort of exclude the possibility of it being a compilation in the 2nd century. Now, that doesn't preclude that there were other versions of Daniel floating around. We do know that there were many versions of, say, biblical scrolls that were in circulation. So I do think that it's very, very possible that there's more than one text of Daniel floating around. I mean, that's definitely possible. In fact, it's likely. It's likely. I mean, for example, Oregon was said to have many different versions of various Old Testament manuscripts, and they differed. So, that's something we should expect, that there's different versions floating around. However, that's very different than alluding to a late composition here. Just because we do find a text that is actually earlier, that is, for most scholars would freely admit that the Septuagint dates to the 3rd century BC. So now there are stuff like the Apocrypha that are added later to Septuagint, but I do think, for example, as core books, the core books would have been much earlier than, say, later editions, because we do know that the way they translated it, I mean, they did start pretty much with Torah. They then moved to the prophets and the writings, and then they moved to the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha was really among the last books of the Septuagint to have been translated. So, and the whole process took a century. But if you're talking 2nd century, I mean, you're talking the 100s. I mean, that's very late for the Book of Daniel. Very, very late. So I've got some real doubts about that. Now, again, I'd have to look closely at 4Q242 to see what's being suggested here with that. But again, it doesn't surprise me if there's more than one version of Daniel floating around either. So anyway, that's probably the best I can give you on this one without looking into it further. Thank you very much for Super Chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Let's go back to Twitch it here. And next one here is from Mouthwash for $2. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. Bible down here. Have you read Jan Osman? Is he well regarded? Yes, I have read some Jan Osman. He's written a lot of books, though. A lot of books. I mean, he was a very, very prolific writer. Exceptionally prolific. He's got some good ideas. I'll say that. Osman has some good ideas. Some of his ideas, one of the things that Osman has been accused of is overgeneralizing. Okay. So he does have a tendency to overgeneralize certain things as in almost a synchronic way. And his approach to some things has been hasn't stood the test of time. Like, for example, one of the things is that he suggested that the Egyptian concept of Ma'at is a universal that was true throughout Egyptian history. The fact is, we really don't find a lot of reference to Ma'at prior to the 19th dynasty. And that is because the kings of, say, Dynasty 19 start using Ma'at as part of their religious agendas. So that's not something that's borne out well. Also, some of what Osman has done has been very speculative. Like, he wrote a book on Moses the Egyptian that was very speculative in some respects. His work on Akhenaten has been very speculative. Some people love him. Some people really, really love Osman. I'm sort of lukewarm on him. I'm lukewarm on him. I'll read him. I think he does have some interesting commentary. Most of his books were really meant for a lay audience, but they also had scholarly appeal too. He was a bright guy, very, 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 very smart, very, very smart. And as I recall, he did have a kind of faith. I mean, he did believe in a historical Moses. I think he was a believer in Jesus Christ. His faith was tended to be more private, but he believed in a historical Moses. But who exactly that Moses was, sometimes could be a little bit out in left field. So, I think he's hit or miss, honestly. And again, I wouldn't dissuade you from reading him. I think he's got some interesting ideas. But as I said, they didn't always stand the test of time. So again, that's sort of my opinion on Osman. Interesting writer, interesting ideas. He can be thought-provoking. He can be very thought-provoking. But also take him with the proverbial grain of salt as you read him. So I hope that gives you some guidance there. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I know he was very good friends with James Hoffmeyer. So I know the two knew each other very well. So, and I know Jim speaks very, very highly of Osman. So anyway, thank you very much for super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Heard a claim Greek philosophers took inspiration from Egyptian philosophy. Yes, and it is probably true. Plato and others did study there. They did. Did Egypt have sophisticated philosophy? No. What they had was sophisticated religion. They had a very, very complicated religious system. Now, a very, very complicated religious system can seem indistinguishable from philosophy. So when the Greeks started traveling to Egypt in the 7th century BC, and they started encountering Egyptian religion, they found something there that was much, much more complicated than anything that they'd ever occurred in their religious system, and even in the ways that, say, the Egyptians worked this out is very interesting too. Basically, and it's a cultural thing in Egypt. It's still practiced. This is what I'm about to say is still practiced there today. Is you'll get one guy who starts asking you questions. He'll ask you questions. Okay, what do you think about this? All right. Do you believe in the Jewish God or do you believe in the Egyptian gods? Oh yeah, okay. If you had to choose between one Egyptian god, which one would it be? And they'll ask you these questions over and over and over again. I remember when I was at Abu Simbel. I'd done some night photography. And I was on my way back to the hotel. Abu Simbel, it's a walk between Abu Simbel and the hotel. And you're not going to grab a cab. You're walking. It's not that far anyway. I mean, it's only a few hundred meters, but still, it's a bit of a walk. And I arrived back at the gate of the hotel, and the night watchman is there, and he's talking with one of the guards who works at Abu Simbel. And they're speaking in Arabic, but my Semitics is good enough that I could just sort of barely follow along with what's going on. And the guard who's a Copt, he's a Coptic Christian. Great guy. I got to know him a little bit. Fantastic. I even got some photographs of him. A wonderful man. He started asking this Muslim guard, about King David in the Bible, or in the Quran, and Moses in the Quran, and Ramses in the Quran, and was just one question after the other. And like a good student, the guard responded. So it was very, very interesting to hear this Old Testament discussion going on in relationship to the Quran. So the ancient Egyptians did something very, very similar, where they would talk about their gods in this sort of fashion, and they would sort of elucidate on this. Okay, yeah, you've got the great Aeneid. You've got the earth god and the sky god Nut. Well, you can see Nut in the sky. There she is. Well, what about Geb? Where's his limits? How far does he go? Does he just end at the in the daytime, or does he also in the night sky as well, in the Amduat? So these are the questions. These complex questions of religion would be asked over and over and over again, and the Greeks picked this up. They saw this dialectic, and it was something that was novel to them. So that's what they brought back to Greece, was just this question and answer, this dialectic discussion of ideas. And that religious philosophy, this complicated religious system of Egypt, basically transformed into this sort of inquiry into spirit world, understanding of reality, metaphysics, epistemology, that we have come to know as Greek philosophy. And many Greek writers have noted this. Sophocles noted this. It was even said once. It was even said that a philosopher's education wasn't complete until he had taken a trip to Egypt. So this was something that was very, very popular amongst those who study Greek philosophy, and even men of culture in general. You could even call it the first tourist trade, where Greeks would take vacations to Giza to see the pyramids and the Sphinx, and then learn a little bit about Egypt as they traveled. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But yeah, there's more than ample evidence for this happening amongst Greek philosophers. More than ample evidence. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Why does Sentinel Apologetics call you Daddy Falk? Because he's Australian? From what I understand, he does this from it's from the saying, "Who's your daddy?" Basically, the guy who's basically overruns everyone else, as it were, top dog. He means it as a sign of respect. It does sound very strange, however, to North American ears. I'll say that. It sounds strange to me every time I hear him say it. So, but I think that's where he gets it from. If he pops on today, maybe he can elaborate why he does it. I'm never sure exactly why he does it.
We've been told it's from Who's Your Daddy? You are.
But yeah, it's been suggested to me that's from Who's Your Daddy. Okay? So that's as far as I understand it. If there's any other meaning to this, I'm not aware of it. So that's the best I get. Okay? Yeah, it strikes me as odd too. But I accept it. All right? Nathan, you don't. Better go with Pharaoh Falk. Laugh out loud. Well, That also sounds strange to my ears as well. So,
I like
you like Pharaoh folk?
yeah.
Producer loves Pharaoh folk. Okay, well.
I'm good with no.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the Palpatine affectation, but hey, some people do love Sith Lords. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And that's the best I can give you on this one because even I don't really know. Okay.
But it is a sign of prayer.
Yes, it is a sign of friendship. It is that. All right. Uh, the next one here is from Transatlantic Whirlwind for 499. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is Kitchen's book on Old Testament reliability a good book on the topic? And do you know of any other good ones, Dr. Falk? Yes. The Old Testament, Kitchen's book on the reliability of the Old Testament is excellent. It's very, very good, and it's very detailed. It is getting long in the tooth. It could stand a good update. It's not going to get that. It's not going to be updated. But it's still a very good book. There hasn't been anything yet that has replaced it. Now, there are other good books. I would suggest Baker's, I think it's called Backgrounds of the Old Testament. That's very good. Other books I could recommend. I'd have to think about it a bit. Yeah, but those are two that I would highly recommend right off the get go. That Backgrounds of the Old Testament, and I think it's edited by Walton. And Kitchen's book on the reliability of the Old Testament is also very, very good. So you're not going to go wrong with that. In fact, I would highly recommend Kitchen's book as a good primer. If you want to get sort of into this in a way that's, Addison, we're correcting me here. Behind the scenes of the Old Testament is what's called. Addison just added that. Yeah, I still get sometimes confused because Backgrounds of the Old Testament was the working title. I contributed to that book, but it was the publisher did eventually change it to Behind the Scenes of the Old Testament. Yeah, so that's the actual name of the title of that book. But either of those books are very, very good, and you won't go wrong with either one. So anyway, but yeah, if you want a primer that just gets you sort of going on evidence for the Old Testament, definitely get Kitchen's book. It's very good. Even still, there hasn't been anything to replace it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Continue to keep our family and I in your prayers. Our dog, whose kidneys were failing her, you might recall, passed away on Monday. I'm very sorry to hear that. Deepest condolences from us here at Ancient Egypt in the Bible. We know what it's like to lose a pet. It is a horrible, horrible loss. I don't know what the relationship is between you and your pets, but for us, when we lose a pet, it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. We will definitely keep you in our prayers. Thank you for the update. When you update us, it lets us know what to pray for, and I very much appreciate that. One more. Okay. Yeah, then we'll get to that in a moment here. Well, we take the super chats in order. So, but yeah, again, our deepest condolences about this. Okay, the next one here is from the Camelopard. I just want to make sure that I'm not skipping us, getting this in the right order. Okay. the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to you too. My sister is getting married tomorrow afternoon, and I have the honor of being her officiant. Prayers will be greatly appreciated. Well, congratulations to your sister. I hope that's very exciting news. I hope she has a very, very blessed marriage. You know, marriage is a great thing. It's a celebration of life. So absolutely, it's an honor to be an officiant there. And it's wonderful news to hear that your sister's getting married. Well, blessings and may God's richest blessings be upon her and her future marriage. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat.
And may give a wedding ceremony that they will treasure.
And my producer adds here that may you give a wedding ceremony that is a blessing to them also and enriches their lives. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and that's great news. Very, very happy to hear that. Okay, Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Is there evidence for animals, for example, dogs, going to heaven? Well, evidence for people going to heaven is pretty scarce. If we get right down to that. But on the assumption that people go to heaven, is there the possibility that animals can go to heaven? And there is I will say it is a definite maybe. Now, this is a complicated subject. This is a really complicated subject. And it's been debated through the centuries. Now, there has been questions upon, the Fourth Lateran Council basically said that animals don't have souls and don't go to heaven. But there was a lot of bad decisions made to the Fourth Lateran Council. Don't get me started on that travesty of a council. That was just one of the most awful councils ever to be devised. So, I wouldn't take that for anything. However, there's been some very interesting work done on this. And very recently, actually. There has been some suggestions that if and let me put it this way, I don't take this. There's a not so serious argument that's made for animals going to heaven and a more serious argument for animals going to heaven.
Leopard boy said.
But now they got cats. They're the ones tormenting you in hell.
Cats keep coming in. Coming out.
Are you saying cats are the Arminians of the animal world? Keep going in and out.
I haven't decided yet. Changed my mind.
Dogs are the Calvinists. Cats are the Arminians. Yeah. So we don't want to make too light of this, but there is a non-serious and a not so serious argument for this and a serious argument. Okay. Now the not so serious argument is the idea that heaven cannot be heaven if your idea of heaven is incomplete without your pets. Okay. Now, at one level, this argument does appeal to one's emotion very, very strongly. The whole idea that heaven cannot be heaven if you're not reunited with your pets. Okay. Well, you're not going to be necessarily reunited with all your family members either. So there are plausible objections to that say more emotional argument there. Now, on the other hand, we do know that when a pet is in a family, especially indoor pets, that they develop certain characteristics that they wouldn't normally develop when they're out in the wild. Like, for example, you got a rabbit, and rabbits that live in war and life have, it's eat or be eaten. That sort of it's not a good way to live. But you get a rabbit in your home, and all of a sudden, it starts developing very social characteristics. It communicates with you. It's got a language. It can feel guilt. It knows it's doing something wrong.
And it does it anyway.
And it does it. Sometimes it does it anyway. Sometimes it doesn't. Because it knows it's doing wrong. Sometimes it wants to do right. It's got a moral. How do I say it? A sense of morality, a sense of right and wrong. But at the same time, too, it doesn't have the moral responsibility. And that's because the traits are emergent. When you have an emergent trait like that, now you have a decent argument for animals having a kind of soul. And that more serious argument is, well, if it has a soul, that's something that survives into the afterlife. And that's a serious argument for the idea that maybe not all animals go to heaven, but certainly pets could. Because if they have emerged into having that sort of consciousness and self-consciousness, then they are a being that has at least limited sentience and the ability to perceive things in a reflective manner. Thus, that is something that would then be preserved into the afterlife. So I think that is a very weighty argument for the idea that some animals could go to heaven. Now, this then begets the question of what about other animals? Well, it's a big universe. Big universe. The idea of an afterlife for animals may not be restricted to heaven. It may also be somewhere else. So, there's also the potentiality that God has other plans for the spirits of animal kind. That there could be some other place other than heaven where the souls of animals, say, live out their eternity. So there's a lot of possibilities here. As I said, some I think are better than others. I think the idea of the emergent properties of animals, I think, is the strongest argument for animals being reunited with humans in the afterlife. I think it's a good argument. I think the sort of it's not heaven without them. It's an emotional argument. It's not a very good argument, but it does have some sway. I don't deny that it is very emotionally appealing. So anyway, again, we sympathize with your loss. I hope this helps. It's a complicated question. It's one that theologians have struggled with. So anyway, I hope that gives you some help and some guidance. And again, please accept our condolences. Thank you very much for the super chat, and we very much appreciate it. And we'll be praying for you. The Camelopard for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Would we expect to find Moses' name in hieroglyphs? Well, if it is, we probably wouldn't find Moses in hieroglyphs just because he probably was not old enough to make for himself commemorative stele. He wouldn't be on a lot of religious documents, like temple walls. So it's unlikely, as the son of a vizier's daughter, adopted son, not important enough until he had maybe attained, say, some status as an administrator or scribe. So it's unlikely we'll find Moses' name in a document. But at the same time, too, if his name is a theophoric Mesha name, we already know what it should look like in hieroglyphs, which is the owl followed by the pool hieroglyph. So it's not a complicated name, but it is a name we do find in Egyptian texts. So I don't think we should expect to find an inscription with Moses' name, but if it was one of those common Mesha names, then we know what it would look like if he had written it in hieroglyphs. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But he was run out of town probably in his 20s. So, yeah, that's usually not old enough to gain a lot of respect as a scribe and basically leave a lot of inscriptions behind. So I'd be very, very surprised if we find anything at all, at least in Egypt. So I thank you for a super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Awesome Weir for $1.99. What is the best book you read in 2022? Ooh. Ah. Well, anyway, thank you for the super chat. Let me think about that for a moment.
I like the assumption everybody here is read a book.
Yeah, I love that assumption too. We're book readers.
That rather than what you see on YouTube where they go out and say, "Have you read a book?" And 90% of the answers.
I am actually going to say the best book I read in 2022. Let's see here. Was Toponymy on the Periphery. Let's see if I can look up who wrote that. It's been a while since I looked at that. I've read a couple. Read several books last year. Ron and Eichler's. Forget what the name of it is, On the Ark of the Covenant. Just do a quick look up the titles for you. That was pretty good too. If you want a good book on the Ark of the Covenant besides the one I wrote, Ron and Eichler's is very good. But let me just get that here. The Ark on the Cherubim is by Ron and Eichler. That was a good book. But I think Toponymy on the Periphery was just... Oh, actually, that looks like I read that in 2021. So never mind. But yeah, I think the best one... Was that in 20? No, that was in 2019. I'll say this. Um, Best one in 2022 had to be The Ark and the Cherubim by Ron Eichler. So that's probably the best book I read in 2022. I unfortunately did not go to the conferences this year, so I didn't get as many books as I normally do. When I go to these conferences, like SBL, like RC, like ETS, I normally buy a lot of books. Everyone who goes to these conferences buys a ton of books and usually has them shipped back. So you'll come home and you'll get these packages in the mail with like 6, 8 books, and you've got a glorious amount of reading ahead of you. Uh, but the downside of that is that you've got a lot of books to read. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go to conferences this year because of what COVID did to my economic status. So I had to settle for the few books that I had to review. So my choice in books this year was a little more limited than normal. I am planning on going back to the conferences this year. So I will probably be picking up more books as I do this. So, Dragon King at Kiara Falk. Haha, I think half of everyone here is waiting to see your husband's library collection in the flesh. Well, you do see it. You do get a picture of it. When I do my Monday releases, that green screen that I have behind me with the bookshelves, that's my actual bookshelf. It was very funny when I first did that. It's become a cliche, where people put bookshelves behind them. But I did something very, very interesting with mine. I put very interesting things in my bookshelf. So I curated it so that it would be very eclectic. So you have scholarly works up there. You'll see Heiser's book up there. You'll see dictionaries and various grammars. But then you'll also see like MS Gundam up there, Mobile Suit Gundam. You'll see anime, comic books.
Used it.
Oh yeah.
You know, to tell me when we were dating and we went to the bookstore.
Well, we used to. My wife and I, when we were dating, we would go to these library book sales, and we would come back with carloads full of books.
Literally.
Yeah, literally a carload full of books. People thought we owned a used bookstore because we had bought so many books, but we were both bibliophiles. I remember when my wife, when we were dating, she came to my apartment and she saw this massive pile of books in the living room. Just a minute, she was horrified. Oh, absolutely horrified. This was the worst of clutter and messiness. And then I took her to the library book sale, and she came back with more books. So we are very much bibliophiles. We love books, absolutely adore books. So the fact I haven't been able to get more books this year has been a bit of a hardship. So I'm definitely looking forward to going back to the conferences, getting back into that saddle post-pandemic, and really digging into what's new in books. So anyway, the best I can recommend for 2022 would be, as I said, Ron Eichler's The Ark and the Cherubim. And it's not a perfect book, but it was the best I read in that year. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And let's hope for a more literate year. Okay, Okazaki Tomoya for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. I've heard it said Mesha Stele's 40-year oppression isn't 40 years. Couldn't it be literal, though? starting while Omri was a general, continuing during his 5 to 7 year reign, and rest is his sons. Okay. Well, the thing is, it's not the 40-year oppression that's in the Mesha Stele. It talks about Omri's 40 years, his reign of 40 years. Okay. So the problem here is that Omri reigned 12 years. So it's not talking about an oppression. It is talking about a reign. So we have to keep that in mind. And we do know from the biblical account that it was 12. So that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem with trying to read it literally. The second problem is we do find that the term 40, particularly in regards to 40 years, is a common biblical and ancient Near Eastern idiom. So, even if you do try to force a literal reading here, you are going to encounter this as an idiom elsewhere. So we do find this, for example, in the book of Judges, where the first several judges have, say, years of peace that are 40 years. If you start taking that literally, you start ending up with some pretty weird figures overall. So, I don't think you can really force it for the Mesha Stele. It just won't work. Not if you're reading the text properly. I also think that you're going to encounter it in other problematic contexts too. So, sometimes 40 is 40 years, literally years, but often it's not. Often it is an idiom, and you just kind of have to accept that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I don't think there's a good way to make that literal. So thank you very much, and I do appreciate the question. Camel open for $5. Why would Mesh be a better Egyptian rendering of Moshe than Moshe? Well, okay. W. Sheen would be a better rendering if it existed in the Egyptian. Problem is, it doesn't. So we don't have anything that is like that. Moshe is as close as we get in the Egyptian. As I said, that's of the water. Now, Mu, water pool. Yeah, but you don't find that in names. That's the problem with that. Is it's not something you find in names. Mshe, yeah, you find in names. Mushe, no, you don't find that in names. The other problem is that the quail chick is usually not Mo. It would be Mu. Or Moa. Okay. The quail chick can go either two ways on this. It can either be a long O, like a double O, like an oo sound. Or it can be a W sound, like a W. Possibly even a V. But it's not an O. That O is something we find in Hebrew. But the closest consonantal equivalent we find of it is M sheen. And the O is added even in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it's It's a maters. So it's not in the original. It's sort of one of those things that's added later on. So yeah, I don't see that Mouche being as viable. I don't see it being as viable. I don't see at least any analog that we find in Egyptian names. Not that I can remember off the top of my head. It's not like Messis, and it's. I mean, at least in the case of Mshe, we find those names extant. We find those theophorically extant. We also find mess names extant. We don't find Mouche names extant. So I think that's going to be a problem with the theory. But anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. I could be wrong. Maybe they are some extent. I haven't seen them. So if there is, might consider it. But you're still gonna have an issue with that vowel. Because remember, you have to remember too that W is not a vowel. It's a consonant. And that consonant is not preserved in at least the original consonants of Moshe. It's M, Sheen, Hey. So that is going to be a problem. So, again, we have to be very, very careful about the rules of transliteration here, because they're very specific. It's not always going to be exact equivalence, but they very seldom deviate from those rules either. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Carlo for $4.99. Thank you very much. Super chat. And he says, God help me. I've been assigned to teach teens Sunday school. My deepest, deepest sympathies. At Greek Orthodox Parish. Oh dear. What advice do you have to get teens interested in Bible, especially the Old Testament? Okay. Now, I say that tongue in cheek, but it is actually really exciting. I did have taught teen Sunday school. Not in Greek Orthodox parish, but I have taught it. I've actually taught it in a Hispanic congregation. Now, here's the advice I'm going to give you. Use illustrations. Do physical demonstrations. The more tactile, illustrative things are, the more likely they're going to get it. Now, when I did it, we had all sorts of crazy gimmicks, to get people interested.
Are you gonna tell them the Alto soda and?
Oh yeah, we used Altoids and soda. We did this one with chainmail and a sword. I mean, really good set of chainmail that I made when I was still doing chainmail and sword making. So I knew that this sword was not going to cut through it. But basically, you put your hand around the chainmail, put the sword in, and you draw it through, and your hand's safe because it's being protected by this chainmail. And we use this for the full armor of God, to teach the full armor of God. Show them a piece of armor, show them a sword, and demonstrate that you're safe because of the armor. And God's armor makes you safe. So illustrations like that, I'm not necessarily recommending that particular illustration, but they will get interested. And the more you make it alive for them. Yeah. I don't remember what the lesson was with the Altoids, do you?
No, I just remember.
Yeah, well, we did Altoids. I mean, my producers is insisting I tell you about the Altoids, even though I don't remember what.
That's what got like the entire congregation there.
Oh,
It got their attention.
it got their attention, yes, but we had them write little scrolls in Hebrew. You know, we did, choices between apple and the forbidden fruit and the mystery thing to teach Adam and Eve creation. So, the more illustrative things are. And basically, you know what we had? We had this we had this mystery substance that was forbidden. We shouldn't have that. And then, and we made this substance super bitter. Super bitter. Safe but bitter. And then a piece of apple. Almost every kid picked the bitter one because it was forbidden. Okay, so, if you use illustrations like this, you can really pique their interest. And once you pique their interest, they'll just voraciously start reading the Bible. I was an adult, as I was teaching this class to these teens, I was at a Bible study, and I don't speak any Spanish. My Spanish literacy is zero, absolute zero. And I was sitting there because it's part of what I had to do was sit there, at this Bible study in Spanish and didn't understand a word. And this woman comes up to me and he says, "It's all your fault," in English. And it's like, sorry, what did I do this time? She goes, "My son is asking me about questions about the Bible, and I can't answer them. What do I do?" I said, "Keep giving him the Bible." But that was a real change. It was a real change. And these things don't last forever. They last for a season. But you, as a Sunday school teacher, have the opportunity to bring this stuff alive. Make it real. Make it interesting. Don't make this dry. If you aren't interested, they're not interested. So, yeah, this is a great opportunity. That would be my advice. Lots of illustrations. Teenagers are interactive creatures. They're interactive creatures. They want stuff that grabs their attention. They need stuff that they can sort of wake them up. It wakes them up, and then you can attach a serious teaching to it. And then once you do that, they'll just ride it. They'll just ride it. We have had teenagers that after some of our teachings, I remember I'll say a couple because they eventually did get married. Two kids, boy and a girl, who were in a gang. And the parents dropped them off on the front step of the youth group. Okay? Drop them off on the front step of the youth group. They're in grade 10. And they were mouthy. Oh boy, were they mouthy. But 3 years later, they were both wanting to go to Bible college. Now, that's a transformation. That's a real transformation. God changes lives. I've seen it happen. I have very much seen it happen. So, yeah, make it visual, make it illustrative, and just let God work. But to attach it, don't just make it go on the gimmick. Tie it to a real serious teaching. Tie it to real Bible and real Bible study. And if you do that, they will run with it. Answer the questions. Oh my gosh, these people are full of questions. Yep, teenagers are full of questions. Once they know you can answer their questions, they'll never stop.
He needs to decide what he's going to teach and teach.
Did he ask that? Okay. Well, again, yeah. Your parish is going to have some say in what you teach. Okay. But you probably have a lot of freedom in how you teach it. That's probably going to make a bigger impact, to be honest. If it's a Greek Orthodox parish, there's going to be certain parameters to that. I don't know what they are per se, but keep it within the confines of those parameters. But how you teach it may be largely up to you. So again, that's the advice I'd give you. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Keith Wise for $10. This is for the question I forgot to super chat. Okay.
And I asked him, and I didn't get reply back. He had asked, do you think Luke 23:43, when Jesus says to the thief, "You will be with me in paradise," that paradise is a compartment of both, and it seems to be both good and
okay, I think then that's probably the question then. And he asks, do you think Luke 23:43, when Jesus says to the thief, "You will be with me in paradise," that paradise is a compartment in Sheol, seeing that seems to be both good and bad go to Sheol? That's debated, but largely the consensus is that it is heaven. Paradise is heaven, not Sheol. Now, while the thief might have had a temporary transit through Sheol, the idea that Christ basically went to Sheol, basically did his, proclamation down there, and then ascended to heaven that same day, is generally where theologians basically they rest. That's basically what they say, is essentially paradise is an equivalent for heaven. Now, I can't quote you any scholars on that because I don't know any off the top of my head, but that's basically what I've read from the consensus. That paradise is equivalent to heaven, not Sheol. At the same time, too, however, and some of that is because Christ doesn't spend much time down there at all. And basically he says to the thief on the cross, I say to you, truly, you will be with me today in paradise. So there's that idea that they're going to go down there just for the briefest amount of time, and then all those who are saved are going right to heaven. So that's typically how exegetes will interpret paradise, is that it is heaven. But there might be some who do think it's Sheol too. I don't know the lay of the land there as far as the scholarship, but most of the commentaries I've read have basically fallen on those lines. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Aston Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Name some biblical problems with American young Earth creation. Trigger the fundies. Oh, I don't like to provoke them, honestly. Um, they have their own problems. They're hemorrhaging people. They are losing people to atheism. I don't think they need. I. They're in trouble. They're in trouble. They don't need our help to make matters worse. Okay? Now, with that said, there are some biblical problems with American young earth creationism. Um, a lot of it is their hermeneutic. The hermeneutic where they read, say, so-called chronological data like Genesis 5 and 11 literally, I think it's deeply problematic. You're going to get problems with historical events such as the building of the pyramids. That's going to be an ongoing issue with them. I also think too that their sense of history is so contracted that they are going to run into, say, problems with very old civilizations as well. Like, for example, we've now got archaeology from, say, Göbekli Tepe, which dates back to 12,000 BC. That's much older than their conception of the age of Adam. So that's going to be an issue. Biblical problems are going to include stuff such as how they, for example, interpret Genesis 1:1. That's going to be an ongoing issue as well. Is it a title? Is it the first act of creation? Well, American Young Earth creationists like it to have it both ways. They want their cake and eat it too here. So they want to say it's a first act of creation where God creates the heavens and the earth. At the same time, too, they're not going to want to say that the heavens are the stars and sky or stars and the sun and the moon and all that. In which case they're going to say, well, it's a title. They want their cake and eat it too here. And I think that's going to be a interpretive problem that I haven't seen a lot of American young earth creationists honestly deal with. Now, at the same time, too, I also haven't seen continental young earth creationists deal with that as well, so it's not a problem that's unique to them. But it is a problem. I also see the other problem with American young earth creationism is that it takes in its quest to do a literal reading of, say, the book of Genesis, it ignores the ancient Near Eastern context of it. Like, for example, they'll never address sort of the temple motifs. They'll never address the fact that Noah's Ark is a sacralizing converter. They will consistently try to read things in the most wooden, literal way they can. And there's times when that's appropriate, but a lot of times it isn't. So, at the same time, too, they'll also ignore the most common creation passage in the whole Bible, which is and you find this passage like, I think 7 or 8 times in the Old Testament, where God stretches out the heavens like a curtain or like a tent. It's a very common passage. It's the most common creation passage we actually find in the Bible. As I said, it's repeated like several times, like over, I think 7 to 9 times. I can't remember the exact number, but it's a lot. So there's a lot of things that American young earth creationists believe that open the Bible to ridicule. And that's the big problem. And a lot of this comes down to interpretive matters, really. So that's, again, it's usually going to boil down to hermeneutics and basically ignoring the ancient Near Eastern context of the biblical texts. But that hermeneutic is going to have consequences when it comes to how American young earth creationism can or cannot be concordant with history. So, yeah, it's got problems. It's got problems. But I also don't think we should, just pick on them. There's a lot of views of creation, not just American young earth creation, that have problems. Okay? Every view has problems. But, so it would be unfair to just target them. This is why I stay out of this game. Because they all have problems. You just have to dig a little bit under the surface to find them. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Michael Laterno for $2 Canadian. And thank you very much for the super chat. He says, do you think the flood was real but exaggerated? Okay, I think it was real. I think it was even global. I also think, though, that what we mean by global is hard to pin down. Okay? Now, the fact is, why load all the animals on a bark if, you're not going to, if it's just a local deal? What's the purpose of that?
A lot easier to walk them.
Load the ark with food for yourself and forget about the animals. Let them take care of themselves. It's just a local thing. It just ain't gonna. I mean, it is something that's going to be an inconsistency with a local flood scenario. Is why go through all the trouble? Yeah, sure, build an ark, but don't load it with animals. They make a mess. Load it with salted meat, grains, food for you and your family. Forget about the animals. Let them take care of themselves. Having an ark with animals only matters if there's an extinction possibility. So, you could say it's real but not real, or that the flood is local, but then it's also in many respects missing out on, say, the context too. Now, the context is that the ark is a sacralizing converter. Now, let me explain what that is. It's something used in temples. Now, a sacralizing converter is basically you have a box, and somebody brings you, say, profane figs. They want to go to a temple, and they want to give figs to Amun-Re. Okay? And I use this because these are real examples. Okay? You go to Karnak Temple, and you want to get, you're a fig farmer, and you want to give your figs to Amun-Re. And you start walking up to the temple, and some priest goes, oh, there. Those are profane figs. They're unclean figs. Who knows what was roaming your fields when you picked them? All right. What do? Well, the priest goes, hey, okay, I'll help you out. So you pass the figs through a window. And there's a plinth there with a box, a sacred box. They open up the box, take your profane figs, stick them inside the box, put the lid on. They do some chants, some rituals. They carry the box into the center of the temple, open the box, and out comes clean figs. Okay? What the ritual of the box has done is it's converted those figs from profane to something appropriate to give to a god. It's a converter that makes things sacred. A sacralizing converter. Okay? So, the Ark, Noah's Ark, is a sacralizing converter. It's basically taking stuff, unclean stuff, from the old world. Stuff that's tainted. That's unholy. Loaded the ark with those things. The ark with those things. And then God brings them through the flood. Opens it up to a new world where now clean animals come out and clean people. People who have been made sacred for the new world. Okay? It's a kind of sacralizing converter. And we see this in temples everywhere in the ancient Near East. So, if everything didn't get wiped out, you wouldn't need a sacralizing converter. You wouldn't need anything at all. So I think this is one of those places where local flood theories actually do a disservice to the text and its ancient Near Eastern context. So, just like the young Earth creationists, ignore the context of Genesis 1 to drive their point home. The local flood people ignore the context of Genesis 6 through 10 to drive their point home. So that's what my opinion here is on this. So I do tend to lean toward the fact that the flood was real. I don't know the extent of it, but it had to include a certain amount of, say, life on planet Earth. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have anything further to say on that because I don't try to date the flood. I don't try to pin it to a historical event because I think we're at the point where at this point, history is very hard to pin down. But I think if we sort of honor the intent of the text, we do have to say that a local flood here makes a lot less sense than, say, something that was broader in range. Maybe not global, but definitely broader. More broad than local. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Camilla Part for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Randall Rouser? Okay. I have listened to some Randall Rouser. I know he works in I think it's where was it? No, is it the analytic theology? He works. I know I know he works in Canada somewhere on the prairies. He tends to represent more progressive views of Christianity. I'm not a big fan of progressive Christianity. I'll be straight up with that. I tend to be very conservative, and more. I lean more to the historic Christian faith. Randall Rouser is very, very open to more progressive ideas of Christianity.
He's now at
Taylor, okay. Yeah, I don't know where he's teaching at the moment.
Edmonton.
Edmonton, okay, well that makes sense, yeah. I thought it was Alberta. Okay, so not a huge fan of his work. I'm just because I'm not a huge fan of progressive Christianity. I think that progressive Christianity is a stepping stone to, say, skepticism and atheism. So, not a big fan. I understand his view here. He's got moral theological challenges that he's trying to address, and he thinks he can solve it best this way. Okay. I think there are better ways to do most of these issues, but, to each their own on this one. I don't think he's an unbeliever. I do think he is a Christian. And I don't know how, but at the same time, too, how long can he maintain that is anyone's guess as well. So, again, I don't have a huge, I'm not a fan of his. I don't tend to like his views that much. I have listened to a little bit of him, but I do respect the fact that he does hold to at least a strong semblance of the Christian faith. But is that going to be enough for some, for holding an internally consistent Christian faith that's recognizable as Christian is going to be a whole different matter. So anyway, that's my thoughts on him. Again, they're very limited. I'm not a huge fan. I don't listen to a lot of his work. And I have, as I said, I've only heard a few things he's done. So anyway, that's what I will basically limit it to. All right? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, we have a super sticker from Alonzo Muncie for $1. Thank you very much for this super sticker. I know there was a question attached to that, so we are not going to ignore that. Okay. And he asks, Shroud of Turin, now that the carbon dating is retracted, is there any evidence against it? Yes. Yes, there is evidence against it. The strongest evidence against it is the whole what I would call the surface map problem. Now, this is a biggie. We do know how shrouds in the first century were tied. Okay, the entire body is wrapped in the shroud. Okay, it's not draped over top. It's wrapped, almost like a mummy. Think of it like a mummy from head to toe. The problem with the Shroud of Turin is it's if you've ever seen like a surface map that's done for like a video game Avatar, okay, where it's a skin map. You're basically creating a skin map, and you basically have basically a stick figure in a video game, and then you cover it with a map of the human skin to make it look lifelike. Yeah. But the thing is, when you do that, you have a flat image that's being wrapped over 3D, a 2D flat image that's wrapped around a 3D object, and you unwrap that. It looks bizarre. Skin maps look really strange. They look like strange walrus people. It's really bizarre. But that's a geometry problem. The Shroud of Turin is a very, very... It doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like a 3D map. It looks like two 2D images. A backside and a front side. Almost as if the shroud was laid out, the body was put on top, and the second just kind of fold it over. That's not how shrouds were tied in the Roman period. Just not how it was done. So I think what we have here is a very, very sophisticated medieval forgery. a papyrus forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. Because quite frankly, that mapping is just for me a showstopper. It's really a showstopper. I don't like the fact that you get a perfect silhouette image on both sides and no bleed over. None. I mean, it's even strange in this respect, too. It's even strange in this respect.
It's a 2D image.
Yeah. I mean, even if it had been just draped over top, it should have covered the sides of the face, the sides of the body, not be this perfect silhouette.
I mean, the only way it looks the way it does is if you re-put that
on. Yeah. It just isn't. It just isn't. It just does not make sense in any sort of three-dimensional space. So, yeah, I think that's the strongest evidence against it. Honestly, is sort of the 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 fact that it doesn't adhere to wrapping standards of the Roman period. Plus, it makes no sense as far as three dimensionality is concerned. There's no way you could wrap that around a body and produce an image like that. Just won't. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the super chat, but that's my opinion on the Shroud of Turin. I just don't see it, honestly.
But people are still looking for it. That's not the same.
Yeah. My producer points out too that, we're still looking, people are looking for objects that confirm our faith. And I don't think that this is a good object to put our faith in. I think it also has some historical issues as well, to be honest, as well. We do find some early records of it in the medieval period, but that's the earliest we find. And it's very murky, the early history of the shroud. And there was not just one shroud. We also have to keep that in mind as well. There were several shrouds floating around. So we also have to keep that in mind. Which one is this? So even if we could correlate it to historical records, we can't really tie this to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in the first century. Is it the one that was at Constantinople that was pillaged by the Crusaders? Well, there was a shroud that was there. It was pillaged by the Crusaders. Is it the same shroud as the one at Turin? Or is it the other one? No. Because the records aren't consistent. So, yeah, there's still huge issues with the Shroud of Turin. But again, my big deal here is the 3D problem. The skin map problem. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Camilla Part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Which synoptic gospel do you think is the most chronologically accurate? Ooh, interesting question. Well, not John. Say that. I'd probably have to lean to Luke for the most chronologically accurate. Mark and Matthew do seem to have certain ideologies when they write their gospel. Luke seems to be very, very focused on sequential events. So, again, I'm not an expert on the Gospels, but that's sort of where I lean to on first blush to this question, is the whole idea that Luke is trying to gather his sources. He mentions at the beginning of the Gospel that he interviews people. He tries to discover the historical sources. And I think Luke is trying to do a reasonably good job from the perspective of, say, a Greek speaker. See, unlike say Mark, Matthew, and John, who are Jewish and are basically going to write their literature in a Jewish sort of manner, Luke is a Greek. And he's going to take a slightly more Western approach to his gospel. The idea here being that he wants to make things as sequential as possible. So I'm going to sort of lean to Luke on this one. But could be wrong. Could be wrong. I'm not going to die on that hill. Okay? As I say, I'm not an expert on the Gospels. My leanings are much more towards Exodus than they are to the Synoptics. So, anyway.
Yeah, deduce as a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And he was raised in Greek society, so yeah, definitely. I definitely think he would have had a more methodical mindset. And his idea would be much more to show the progression of Jesus Christ than to do this in a thematic way. We do find in the other Gospels that things are done in very thematic ways. And thematic approaches to writing are very, very common in Jewish literature. So, if you're looking for sort of a sequential retelling of events, Jewish literature is usually not the best place to go. So I think, as I say, I think Luke here would offer the best possibility for a chronological gospel. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helps, and very, very much appreciate it. See Slamrn tonight. Good to see you here tonight. I also want to give a shout out here also to Faye of the Duat, who's also been here tonight. It's good to see you as well. All right. Destiny Knight 77 for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you believe humanity originated as monotheistic? And if so, how did other myths and religious beliefs develop? Okay. I sort of do lean towards the idea that humanity started off as monotheistic, but very, very quickly became polytheistic. Very rapidly. And essentially, as people spread out, they had each sort of cluster of human beings had its own conception of God and name for God. And I think as they started to reintegrate, they brought those varying conceptions with them. And that led to the rapid development of polytheism. So, and we do see this, for example, even sort of these processes happen in the development of ancient religions as well. For example, many of the gods of Egypt. I mean, Egypt did not start with a fully fleshed pantheistic or polytheistic system. You know, it started off as city-states, which became then kingdoms, 2 kingdoms. Each province, each city had its own gods. Rather than discount all those gods, or saying that one was better than the others, they sort of integrated them. You know, you got one god in one nome, another god in another nome. Hey, you got 2 gods now. And this led to a multiplication of deities. You add in some foreign gods, you got more multiplication. Each god now needs a consort. Okay, more multiplication. This is how sort of polytheistic systems, work. They they're additive. They build upon each other with new things, new imperatives. You know, you have a sun god, great. Your tribe next door has a different sun god, still fantastic. They're both sun gods. Okay, we can worship them both. They don't see a disconnect with that. They don't see an inconsistency with that. Ancient peoples were very sort of open-minded to the idea that you could have two gods representing the same thing. So there's all sorts of, but this is how polytheistic systems develop, is through cultural exchange, essentially. And the more cohesive the kingdom got, the more cultural exchange happened, the more polytheism flourished. So, even if the entire world started off as monotheistic, it would have ended up polytheistic anyway. Just because of the way human beings conceive of a monotheistic deity. You're almost invariably going to end up with polytheism. And that's just the way religious systems develop. So you really do really need an overriding principle to reverse that course from polytheism to monotheism. Now, in the case of Israelite religions, it's the Ten Commandments that lead to transcendence, and that transcendence ultimately leads to monotheism. But early humans didn't have that, so they're going to end up with a polytheistic system in a few generations, and it happens that fast. It really does. So anyway, I hope that helped. I hope that explains how religious belief systems develop. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and it's an interesting question. Okay, we got a super sticker here from the Camilla Part for $1. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there a question tied to that? I see something below, but it's not addressed to me. Is this just a super sticker, or is this all right, well, thank you very much for the super sticker. We really appreciate it. I mean, we will take questions, but if you just trying to help the channel, we really appreciate it, and we thank you so much. Frankly, basically, your contributions do help keep food on our table, and we are so appreciative of that. Because this is often the lean season for us. I know I recently had my hours at work cut because their profits weren't doing so well. So it really helps us this time of year, and so I very, very much appreciate all the support and all the super chats. So thank you very much for your help and the support of this channel and the work we're doing. Okay. Oh, he says the one that says SC. Okay. So this is the question. All right. Some highly reliable archaeologists say that advocates for 1250 BC date of the Exodus abuse 111 when clearly Ramses, the person, was named after Ramses, the city, right? Some highly reliable archaeologists say that advocates for the 1250 BC date.
Ramses.
Oh, this is Steve Rudd's idiot view. I wouldn't call him a highly reliable archaeologist. No, Rudd's an idiot. And he's a shill for ABR. frankly, I had never heard of this view until Rudd said it, honestly. I have never seen this in any of the serious literature on this. So, let's talk about the view. Because it's a stupid view. And stupid is as stupid does. Okay. Here's the idea. That there is some city out there that's named Ramses. And that the person Ramses was named after the city Ramses. Wow, this is a dumb view. And there's some views that I'll say, okay, yeah, we can debate this. There's some credibility here. This one is stupid. Just plain stupid. All right. The city of Ramses, and we only have one candidate for the city of Ramses. We got toponym lists in Egypt. We've got correspondence from cities in Egypt. The only city that was ever named Ramses in Egypt was the one that we find at Kantir. Okay? And we know from Papyrus Anastasi 3 that it's the full name of the city was P. Usur Ma'are Setepen Re Ramses Mary Amun. That whole thing essentially says the house of Ramses II. Okay? It is excruciatingly clear from Egyptian texts that the city of Ramses was named after the king, Ramses II, not the other way around. Now, the problem here is going to be that that the name Ramses does not have any predecessor prior to Ramses I. Ramses I is the first person in Egyptian texts of any kind to use the name Ramses. Ramesu. Okay? Ra has begotten him. But idiots like Rudd will basically try to say that, well, we find Ramosa prior to this. Well, Ramosa isn't Ramses. Ramosa means Ra has begotten. Or Ra begets. But it's missing that pronoun. So it's really, really clear that this idea has no merit, no warrant at all. It's just crazy. Just a crazy theory. As I said, stupid. It's just plain stupid. And it comes from a bad source. Yeah, it means beloved of Ammon. Yeah, that's what Mary Ammon means. So, Usur Ma'are means mighty of mighty of Ma'at is Re. Okay, so that's Usur Ma'are. Setep and Re, powerful is Re, powerful in Re. Ramasu, Ra has begotten him, beloved of Ammon. So that's sort of the whole titulary of Ramses II. Okay, so it's just, yeah, I think this is a dumb idea, absolutely a dumb idea. But as I said, it's being pitched. I know the only place, as I said, the only place I've ever seen it actually seriously posted in this way is on Steve Rudd's Bible.ca website or something like that. Terrible source. And as I said, a shill for ABR, which just should tell you everything right there. So, tell us how he really feels. Well, anyway, Thank you very much for the super chat. You've got my opinion on this. Boy, when I first encountered this, I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was just idiotic, absolutely idiotic. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Uh, very much appreciate the super chat, but uh, yeah, that's my thought. Okay. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. From at Dragon King, can you give a book recommendation for Greek and Hebrew, beginner, intermediate, and advanced? Thanks. Okay. For Hebrew, I prefer Kelly's textbook. I know some people hate it. Um, I've gone through Prodico. I've gone through Xiao. I hated Xiao. Don't do Xiao. Um, I'm still a fan of Kelly's book. I know it's more of a kitchen sink kind of grammar, but I think it's one of the better ones out there. Honestly, still. I have not done any of the abbreviated grammars. I don't care for abbreviated grammars that much. I like the fact that Kelly's grammar is a good reference grammar. You can, I mean, even after you've done learning Hebrew, there's still a lot in Kelly that's a useful resource years down the road. And to be honest, that will cover most of your beginner, intermediate, and advanced Hebrew because it's that thorough. So I think for Hebrew, my preference is Kelly. Now for Greek, that's going to be different. For beginner grammar, I would recommend Months. With the CD, get the version with the CD because that CD is really helpful, especially if you're trying to self teach yourself beginning Greek. As far as advanced, um, there what was his name now? The advanced. It's going to take me a moment to look this up. Um, let's see, what was it? There is a good advanced Greek grammar, and what was his name? He does not yeah, it's not months. What's that name of that? It's just escaping me for the moment here. You remember the blue covered book, the ones that was like really thick with like 50 definitions for the genitive? It's big, thick book, and I just cannot remember the name of it at the moment. The name of the author. Yeah, I'm gonna have to probably apologize for not being able to remember this, but just wish I could remember it. Um, but the advanced Greek grammar. You're really going to go into the specifics of um, Wallace. Thank you, Benjamin Rush. Yeah, Wallace. I think it was Wallace. Now that he mentions it, that does sound right. Yes. Um, yeah. Greek grammar beyond the basics. That's the one. Okay. Yeah, Greek grammar beyond. So thank you very much for that jog of the memory there. Yeah, I would recommend for the advanced Greek grammar beyond the basics by Wallace, by Daniel Wallace. Um, it's a big, thick book. It's oh yeah. If you don't have your beginner grammar down, this will be tough. Okay, this will be tough. But it's excellent. It's really, really good. It's also really thorough. And it's not something you're going to master quickly. So that would be my recommendations here. Again, Mounce, Mounce, for introductory Greek. Wallace for advanced Greek, and Kelly for Hebrew. So those are Mounce, Mounce. Yeah, Bill Mounce. He goes by William, but yeah. So those are my recommendations for grammars. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very, very much appreciated. BC for $2 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom again. Evidence for a 40-year wandering. Okay. Hmm? Oh, wow. Well, those are both really great resources. I mean, Wallace or Mounce is probably the best introductory Greek. I mean, I think almost everyone agrees now that it's the best introductory Greek text. And Wallace, that's thorough stuff. That's really your reference grammar. So, back to the super chat here. Shabbat Shalom. Evidence for the 40-year wandering. Okay. We don't really know if it's exactly 40 or not. Now, there is one text that talks about the 38th year, where the Israelites are congregate at Kadesh Barnea. So we do know that it is at least around 40 years. The Mesha Stele places the Israelites in Israel at around 1217 BC. If we take the Exodus at 1265, you're looking at a little over 50 years there, which makes good sense roughly, or around 50 years. So you have 40 years for the wandering plus 10ish years to establish themselves in Canaan. So it's going to be around 40ish. Now we're not sure if it's going to be 39 or if it's going to be 42. We can't be sure, but it's going to be around that, because we really don't see the evidence for the Israelites entering into the promised land until basically around that sort of 1220-ish mark. And that's 1220 is when we are going to 12 is roughly when we're going to see it's like destructions at Hatzor. And those late bronze destructions, late bronze 2B. So that's sort of when we sort of get that sort of synergy, that sort of correlation of, say, the destructions of Hatzor with the Mount Ebal, the construction of the Mount Ebal altar site, which is late bronze again 2B. And then you're going to get a few years later the Mesha Stele talking about the Israelites in Canaan. So that's going to be the evidence for a 40-year wandering, is that sort of basically that roughly 40-year chunk of time between 1265 and the entry into Israel around 1225-ish. again, we can't be sure if that's exact. We don't know. And there's nothing here that really is hard and fast will tell us this. Again, we got some things that are close. As I said, that year 38 mark will tell you that it's really, really close to that 40 years. So whether it's a few years one way or the other, that 40, hard to tell. So anyway, that's the best we can do for that. Unless we have some sort of hard and fast, evidence, very difficult to tell. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Oh, 1000 Clever Boy. I wish DTS would hire Falk. Yes, I wish they would hire me too. Mac for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there a good church father that would be a good primer to getting used to their style of writing? Yes. Yes. I would actually take, if you want to get used to the style of writing, I would start with Philip Schaff's Ancient or Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 1. Okay? And what you do is you start with their first one, which is First Clement. And then you go read through Polycarp and then Ignatius, and you do it sequentially. Because one of the things about the early church fathers is the earliest fathers were shorter and had more brevity than the later ones. Okay? So, it will slowly acclimatize you to their style of writing if you just read them sequentially per the way that Schaff has got them laid out. And it's a pretty good translation, too. So, so basically, you then go, you start with the First Clement, and then you move on from there. And eventually, you will hit, at the end of that volume 1 is Irenaeus. I think he's the last one in that volume. And by the time you hit that, yeah, you've got a pretty good handle on what it's like to read church fathers. So that's what I would recommend, is you start at the beginning of volume 1 and you just go right through it. And then you got 6 more volumes after that. And then you can do the post-Nicene Fathers on top of that. And then if you really feel ambitious, you can learn Greek and go through Migne's 300 volumes of church fathers. Yeah. Talk about prolix. Ooh. Yeah. A lot of the stuff from the church fathers still hasn't been translated. I mean, they wrote voluminously. Voluminously. Yeah. 300 volumes of Migne. Ugh. You could be studying the church fathers for the rest of your natural life. There's that much material. You could never get through it all. And those folios were large. Those are large folios. So, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend anyone start with Migne, honestly. But start with Philip Schaff's Ante-Nicene Fathers. Okay, and again, start with volume 1 and work your way through it. That's the best way, and you can get it for free on CCEL, which is the Calvin College Electronic Library, and I think the URL is ccel.org. So, it's free now. It's freely available. It's out of copyright, so you can get the text files for free now. And as I said, great way to start learning this. So, you don't even have to pay any money for this. So, I mean, this is beautiful stuff. Beautiful.
Which is good because you're not going to be earning money if you start reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, my producer points out to you, you're not going to start earning money if you read it, so you might as well not spend money while you read it. So, insider theology joke there, but we won't go into that. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helps. Once you get used to the style, you really start to appreciate the way they think. I mean, really appreciate it. These were men that had tremendous mental capacities. Tremendous mental capacities. They would put us to shame today, really. So, yeah, I have a great respect for their abilities and their intellectual acumen, because it was remarkable. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Addison Weir for 199. Thank you very much for the super chat. What did you say Noah's Ark was? It was a sacralizing converter. Okay. Basically, something that takes unholy objects and converts them into pure or clean or holy objects. So that's what a sacralizing converter does. And we do find them used in temples all over the place. You see them inside of Luxor Temple. These chests on carrying poles with these Uraeus friezes on the lids. They're essentially sacralizing converters. Essentially, impure offerings are put inside of them. The rituals are done. They're carried inside the temple. They open them up, and out pops pure offerings. So it's a way of doing a purification ritual, essentially. And Noah's Ark was one big sacralizing converter. It took unclean animals. It took unclean humans. And it made them appropriate. It purified them for the new world. And that's, again, the problem with a localized flood, is you would then basically take those purified beings and then unleash them on a world that hasn't been purified. So again, context, context, context. And this is part of temple ritual and temple context. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. So, what about the flood and the Epic of Gilgamesh and Epic of Atrahasis? It's been a long time since I've read Atrahasis. As I best recall, I think that's the Marduk and Tiamat narrative, but I can't remember. Again, it's been a long time since I've read this stuff. The Epic of Gilgamesh I read a little more recently, so I'm not sure actually what you want or asking here. So I'm not exactly sure what's being asked. What about it? Well, I mean, it does have a flood narrative. I know Gilgamesh does. I'm not sure about Atrahasis. I'd have to look at it again. As I said, it's been a long time since I've read it. But I know Gilgamesh has a flood narrative. I'm not sure what it says about it, because again, it's Mesopotamian literature is not my specialty. I don't pour through it nearly as often as I do other literature like I find in Egypt. So I'll have to admit some ignorance here, because I don't read this stuff that often. So with that said, I don't know exactly what the question here is, so I'm going to have to defer this. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. very, very much appreciated. Okay. BC for $5 Australian. Thoughts on the very precise timing recorded in the flood narrative? Okay, I'd beg to differ with that, but we'll get to that. Numbers seem literal and reasonable, not matching familiar idioms or symbols. Okay, I don't think they're idiomatic. But we also have to understand that the problem here is going to be that you're using genealogies in a way that's anachronistic if you try to date the flood using that. And that's a problem. The problem is that there's honorific assignment of the son to the date when the patriarch became the father. And that honorific is going to be an issue, because that honorary assignment basically is going to assign every successor to the date of the firstborn, whether or not he was the firstborn. That's going to be an issue. So I don't think you can actually calculate the date of the flood using those genealogies. They're not really genealogies anyway, they're toledotes. And there is actually a slight nuanced difference between a toledote and a genealogy anyway. You know, toledotes tell you what became of people. Genealogies tell you where people come from. Those are two different applications of the data, and hence two different results. The whole purpose of a Western genealogy is to explain where you came from, how long it took, and this is why we have a very chronological approach when we do genealogy. Jewish toledotes aren't viewed as that. They're meant to show you, oh, this is the results of what that ancestor did in the past. Basically, where are you going, not where you came from. So a Jewish toledote is much less concerned about providing accurate chronological data than it is that the ancestors are being properly honored through the chain in which it is showing you the clan succession. So that's going to have a certain imperative when we look at this. And thus we can't use this to derive precise timing. It's impossible. It's just impossible, and it ain't going to happen. So, yeah, the numbers seem reasonable if you look at it through Western eyes. That's the problem, is we're looking at it through Western eyes, and we're trying to read this like a Western genealogy. And you can't do it. You're just going to end up with a big mess if you do that. And this is the problem. You can't do it with Western eyes. Those dates are probably a lot more telescoped, because the date the patriarch became the father does not exactly correspond to the birth of that son. And that's a hard concept for Western readers to get past. Really, really difficult for them to get past, because it's so opposite the way we view the world. That's the way the Jewish writers seem to have been viewing things. So anyway, I hope that explained some of this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. All right, John Febeck for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Can we link the city of Enoch, Genesis 4:17, to any known ancient city? Short answer is no. All that happens pre-flood. There's no city that we know of as Enoch. There's nothing in the historical records. Even if they had those records, we wouldn't even know where it was. It's just one of those things that's sort of recorded in the Genesis narrative, but we just don't have it. And the fact is, it's also one of those cities that's named after an individual. And even that individual, we don't have records of, because all of this is pre-flood. So, does that surprise us if there's records? No. It shouldn't surprise us if there's no records of this. So, because of that, we have not been able to nail this one down. So, and who knows? I mean, we might find some city that's 50,000 years old at some point. It's possible. You know, like Göbekli Tepe was a complete surprise for the archaeologists. Complete surprise. Archaeologists were never expecting to recover anything nearly as old as Göbekli Tepe. So, you never know what the turn of the shovel is going to reveal. So again, we can't link this to anything known city. And even if we do get some writing, we might not even be able to understand it for decades, if not centuries. So, again, we're going to have to be patient here, just because this is something that's so ancient and so outside of our chronological frame of reference here, as far as history goes, that it's going to be very, very difficult to recognize it, even if we find it. So I hope that helps, and I hope it at least puts some of the issues into context. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Oh, did I misunderstand BC's question? Or have I not gotten to it yet? Okay. Oh, he posted at 11:18. Sorry, I meant the days of the flood, the number of the days it rained, etc. Oh, I think okay, I think I get it. What he meant there. This is harking back to this question here, which thoughts on the very precise timing recorded in the narrative. The numbers seem literal, and so he means here the days of the flood, the numbers of the days it rained, etc. Hard to know. I'd have to look at that further to figure that out. It might be. What's that? You better check on your bunny.
Her knees.
What is that?
I don't know. Squirrel. Over there.
We're having some technical difficulties right now. We've got some wildlife, it sounds like, in the home. Great.
Hey, right. Was that her digging?
I don't know. did see something enter last a couple nights ago, remember? I wonder if we got an interloper. Well, live TV for you. Okay, well.
That's her. Now the bunny's down.
Okay, well, that was exciting. We don't know what that was. As I said, we're assuming wildlife, not paranormal phenomena, but who knows?
You got all the way under?
So, all right. So as far as the exact timings of like the days of the rain, numbers of days of rain, days of the flood, I'd have to look at that more to actually really decide on that. So again, it's not an issue I've looked at so far, but again, we'd have to look at it some more. So anyway, thank you for that super chat, and we'll get to the next question. Wild rabbit? Well, we don't know. Hope not.
More likely a squirrel or a rat.
More likely a squirrel or a rat. But
the rats are scary because of the damn dog.
Yeah. This area does have rats. So we hope one has not made an entry here without our knowledge. Okay, so let's go to the next question here. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Skeptics say there is zero evidence of the Israelites wandering in the desert. Is this true? What we expect to find from nomadic tent dwellers? Let me answer that last question first. Almost nothing. Okay. Yeah, Faye, those aren't the good kind of rats.
No, not her cute little rat.
This is not your cute pet rats. These are the nasty rats.
Outdoor feral rat that hurt us in the blood.
Skeptics say they're okay. So let me answer the first question. Last question first. Nomadic tent dwellers leave very little behind. Very little behind. The Bedouin who've been traveling the Sinai for millennia don't leave much behind at all. We only know of Bedouin sites because they've been occupying the same sites for centuries. You know, once they've occupied a site for 200 years, they start leaving some trace evidence. But it's usually stuff like napping, flint tools, charcoal. But the fact is that Israelites wandering the desert would not leave much behind. It's not long enough period of time. Bedouin, even though there have been more of them throughout history, also leave very, very few remains. We also find, say, nomads in China who also, or in Mongolia, that travel the steppes, and they leave very little trace. I mean, they're practically invisible. They come and go. They set up their yurtas and they move on, and they leave very little behind. So, the fact that the Israelites did not leave much evidence wandering in the desert is not surprising. It's not surprising. It's actually to be expected. And also the fact is too that the Israelites also were traveling at a time when the Sinai was a savanna. Now, the problem with savannas is, as far as archaeological remains, is that there's going to be scavengers out there. The ecosystem of a savanna wastes nothing. It wastes nothing. So any food remains are going to be eaten by scavengers. Even fecal remains from humans are going to be basically ingested by insects. So you're not even going to find much in the way of latrines, honestly. Just because the whole sort of ecosystem of a savanna is basically trying to find nourishment wherever it can, and is very, very resourceful in doing it. So you're just not going to find evidence of people wandering the Sinai for 40 years. It just isn't. It's not something you can even reasonably expect. So is it true? Yeah, it's true. There's very little evidence. In fact, there's probably close to none. Now, we do find some agriculture around Kadesh Barnea in the late Bronze Age. Yeah, we found a little bit of evidence of that. But we don't find, much in, say, all the way around the Sinai in general, because, they're wandering around. You wouldn't expect to find them, this evidence. And plus the fact, too, is there hasn't been any proper archaeological survey done of the Sinai. People don't even know. For you to do an proper archaeological survey, you have to have a starting point. You have to be able to narrow it down to a site where you want to do a survey and want to do a dig. Sinai's a big place. Nobody has done a proper ground-proofing survey of the Sinai. This has never been done. So we don't know what sites are out there. Maybe satellite telemetry might find us something. At least a candidate site. But nothing's turned up yet. So, anyway, unfortunately, the prospects aren't good for this, but it's going to take, you never know what the future holds either. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and hopefully we won't have any more drama tonight. Okay. Next.
Case believe in archaeology of battle sites. Well, what are you going to find on the battlefield?
Yeah.
And how much does that actually prove, as opposed to full loader?
Well, yeah. Benjamin Rausch did point this out here. What are you going to find on a battlefield site? A spear, head if you're lucky, leather strap, and what does that tell you? I mean, very hard. I mean, Civil War archaeologists go through this all the time, where they excavate battle sites and they just find little scraps of things. Bullet here, a buckle there, and that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon at all. It's enough to establish some sort of battle might have happened, but it's another thing too to say where's the battle, how extensive it is. That's going to depend too upon size of the battle, conditions on the battlefield. There's a lot of contingencies there. A lot of contingencies. Okay, next super chat. Okazami Tomoya for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Clarification, I don't disagree about 40 in the OT. It's just I don't currently understand how Omri had taken possession of the whole land of Medeba and he lived there in his days and half. And it continues. $5. Thank you. The days of his son, 40 years. Okay. Is about the rule specifically. Could you help me unless the Mesha translation is bad? Yeah, I don't think that's a great I don't think that's a great translation of the Mesha Stele. Oh, I don't know if there's what I can recommend for a better one. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see if I can find a better one here. Uh, okay, the one by Nikakchi, that was published in Orientalia. Was it this one here? What's this one here? About Pritchard's. Not Pritchard's would be any good, but although my guess is the one in the COS might be better. Although by the time I find it, yeah, this might be a question that's too, finding a better translation here might be a little too much to ask of a question here during this live stream. But if I can get the chipmunks of my NAS going here, see here if I can find here. Now let's just go to Pritchard. I know I can find that one easy. Although I would suspect context to scripture would probably have a better, more modern translation. But we'll just use Pritchard for the moment. I'm not always a big fan of Pritchard, but the one good thing about Pritchard is he's easy to look things up in. Okay, so not Pritchard. Mesha. At least I think he's easy to look things up in. Of course, everything right now is taking its sweet time. So, well, that is taking a long time. It's hanging on me. Lovely. All right. Did I find it here? Okay, the Moabite stone. Yep. Okay, I found it. And passage here. Okay. Talks about Omri, king of Israel. He humbled Moab many years, for Chemosh was angry at his land, and his son followed him, and he said, I will humble Moab. In my time spoke thus, I have triumphed over him, over his house, while Israel had perished forever. Now Omri had occupied the land of Medeba, and Israel dwelt there in his time and a half of his son. 40 years, but Chemosh dwelt there in my time. Now, Ahab. Let me just look up my chronology here. So I get a good idea of the players. So we have Omri. Omri ruled, 12 years. There was civil war. And then you have Ahab, who ruled 21 years. So that would be 33 if you take both together. Okay? So even there, you're going to have some issues. So that's not going to come out to 40 years. Even if you did include the time of his son. But however, the subject of the 40 years does not appear to include Ahab. However, it does seem to apply directly to Omri, at least according to the syntax and the grammar. But okay, let's give you the benefit of the doubt here. Let's assume that you're right. Omri and his son are included together. You're still not going to get 40 years out of that. You're only going to get 31. So that's the best you can do here. So even still, you're going to have to come up with an idiomatic approach. You still cannot take this one literally. So I do think that it's there are better translations of this. I do recall when I last looked at this issue that the and his son is that 40 is not exactly a reference to, I can't remember the reason why, but there was a reason, but I'd have to look this one up deeper. So anyway, I hope that helps. I'd have to look at this again some more to get to really sort of parse that text to make sure that I'm looking at, unless I saw anything else here. I mean, if we take that very literally, he dwelt there in his time and half the time of his son Ahab. Yeah, it's just not going to do that. That's not going to be a literal thing. That cannot be literal. Even if you say half the time of Ahab. Half the time of Ahab reigned 21 years. Add, say, 11 years to 12 years. You're still not going to get 40. You're not going to get anywhere close to 40. So I think that's the only reference to Omri there. But so anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. But anyway, thank you very much appreciate it. Okay. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And we are going to be wrapping this up very, very soon. So we are going to start winding down here. I know everyone's tired. And we were including this. And it's been much too eventful of a live stream for my liking. So BC asks, quote, Falk is a Christian and is biased, end quote, sigh. What secular sources and experts can we cite that provide an unbiased foundation for the Exodus? Well, just because you are a Christian doesn't mean you're biased. And frankly, I'm fond of saying everyone has biases anyway. But that doesn't make you more biased than, say, somebody who's an atheist. Everyone has biases. But we also know that from the psychological studies on bias, that being religious is not inherently make you biased. If anything, we have lots of examples of religious people that are not biased. At least not in favor of their religion. Like, for example, every atheist likes to bring out Mark S. Smith, or Mark Smith, who thinks that early Israelite culture was polytheistic. He's a Roman Catholic, but his Roman Catholicism doesn't affect his scholarship. Now, I don't agree with him, but I definitely. I mean, you could make the case it should affect just the scholarship, but in his case, it doesn't. But they love bringing him out as a non-biased source. Well, he's also very religious. So, just because one is religious and one is a Christian doesn't mean you are more biased than an atheist who has a bias against, say, a secular view of, or a view of a historical exodus. Because here's the thing. Well, here's what I find so inconsistent about this. That one does not necessarily need to be religious to believe in a historical exodus. I've never understood this. This is something that sort of boggles my brain. Is you could look at the book of Exodus and see a completely naturalistic view. Take it completely as a naturalistic event. Basically, okay, these Amoritic Semites, had a really weird weather year. All these strange meteorological occurrences happened, but nothing out of the ordinary. They attributed it to their god Yahweh, and they left Egypt after a perfectly natural wind set down, wipes out all Pharaoh's chariots. Completely naturalistic across the board. Not a single event here you might say is supernatural. They could take that approach, but instead they throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. It's really strange. I just don't get it. And they'll strain the gnat. They'll come up with some crazy explanations to ad hoc their way out of this. Okay, ad hoc the way to basically poo-poo a historical exodus. And they will put layers and layers and layers of ad hoc reasoning on top of this to get that result. Where, say, the parsimony of explanation much more in favor of a historical exodus. But that's what bias does, though. Is bias. You can sort of see when there's a bias here, because there's that tendency to put layers and layers and layers of ad hoc reasoning on things, when the simplest solution goes against the bias. Yeah.
They're aware.
Yeah. Yeah. Sociological studies tend to show that religious people are less biased in research because they tend to be aware of their biases. Now, I'm going to point you here at this point to, was a video done by Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones. He did a small video on the whole issue of religious bias in research and what the sociological papers, showed. What the psychology of this is. And study after study shows that religious people aren't more biased than secular people. In fact, many times they're less biased because, again, they are aware of their biases. So, with that said, I don't know if we can provide an unbiased. I mean, one can definitely provide an unbiased foundation for the Exodus, but it's not, at this point, we don't find it a lot from secular scholarship. There's some, but not. Most of it is going to be naturalistic, and I don't actually have a problem with that. If you want to treat the Exodus as a natural event, yeah, sure, go for it. Sure, as long as we do it consistently, I'm perfectly fine with it. It's, if we treat it just as a historical question, then we could start engaging the evidence on a more fair level, and even on a more temperate level. The way we should be evaluating evidence based upon its context, its archaeology, and its history. Basically, treat the Book of Exodus like any other ancient Near Eastern historical document. And I think that would be a tremendous step forward. Is just treat it like an ancient Near Eastern document. No more, no less. And then we can start having that serious historical conversation. But it's going to be a while, I think, before the tide, basically that tide really turns for that. So anyway, that's my opinion on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. We're not close. All right, Destiny Knight 77 for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you have any thoughts on the Sea Peoples? Yes. Any speculation on their likely origin? Yes. They are tribes of Indo-Europeans that traveled from Anatolia down the coastal plain and basically invaded or settled in the coastal plain. There's various tribes of them, the Luca, the Pelasset, the what's another one? Meshwesh. There's several tribes of them. And they're collectively known by the Egyptians as the Sea Peoples. They're collectively known to the Israelites as Philistines, which is based off the Paliset. Now, we do see them mentioned. Some of these tribes are mentioned as early as the Amarna letters, like the Luca. We find a lot of them mentioned by the time of Ramses II. So, I do think that there is good evidence to say that the Philistines were already in Canaan in the Promised Land by the early 13th century. Easily early 13th century. And they're probably already making incursions in there before that point. So that's where I think their origins from. I think they're from Anatolia. And I think that's what they did, was they sailed that coastal plain and drove out, or at least intermarried and intermingled with the native Canaanite peoples there. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I think that's the final super chat. I'm going to take 2 brief questions and I'm going to call it a night because it's almost midnight. So, we have been going a long time here, and we're going to wrap it up. So, 2 non-super chats, and then we're going to call it a night. So let's see here. Oh, okay, I'm going to take this one. Okay. Patui, Tuspatos says, the Egyptian imu seems to be a homonym meaning rib or clay. Hans Goedeke took this as a sign of confusion, intentional wordplay in the early traditions of Eve creation. Any plausibility to this? Okay. Take anything that Hans Goedeke says with the proverbial grain of salt. Oh boy. Wow. Ugh. Hans Goedeke. How do I say this? Bluntly, my producer says. Okay. Goedeke was incredibly imaginative, but not very thorough. Now, Egyptology as a discipline prides itself on its thoroughness. You know, we were big on being thorough with the data, thorough with the citations. We try to be meticulous, which makes us very good at certain tasks. But Egyptologists overall are not very creative. So we tend to not always see the forest for the trees. Hans Goedeke was kind of the opposite. He was exceptionally creative. Oh, he comes up with some fabulously interesting interpretations of things. The problem is when you start looking at the data and how he got there, you go, wait, that's not what it says. And I have some certain doubts here. Now, let me do a quick grammatical search of this. Okay? Because I don't trust anything that comes out of the mouth of Goedeke. So let's just take a quick, I'm going to look at Faulkner here, because Faulkner is an incredibly reliable source. I'm going to look up emu just to see if there's any sort of traction to this, at least his initial premise. So I'm going to look up emu. Okay, there's M. Okay. Emma. Emu. Okay, I see Splendor. I see emu as ship. I am not seeing it as rib, so let me look up another source here just to be sure. Hawk might be helpful here too. This first. Let's look up rib. Yeah, I'm not finding that for rib. Okay, Sepper is rib. Sephet is ribs. Ooh, so far this is not looking good. Yeah, this is not looking good so far. I will look at a couple more sources here, but... I see. Kicking myself for writing down which book I read. I'm kicking myself for not writing down which book I read Goethe's hypothesis, and now, yeah.
Oh.
We've all done that. We have all done that. Yeah, there's a little book on political theory my wife ran across in the UBC library. Did not write down what it was, and she's been kicking herself ever since over it. And I do not see this in Faulkner at all. The only place I can go next is Lesko. Maybe it's a late Egyptian thing. But yeah, so far this is not looking good. Oh yeah, well that's just it with Goodika is he will just invent stuff. And with the weakest of inferences. I'm definitely not seeing this. Yeah, the word for rib is seper, even in late Egyptian. The possibilities for emu are morning, a boat, vessel. I wonder if that's what he means. Is a like I think he might have seen the word boat and inferred maybe a rib of a ship. But it's yeah, it's. But then again, now I don't even see emu as clay, so I'm not even finding that. Clay is Amet or Sinnet. Ta, it could be clay. The Ben could be a kind of clay. Yeah, I don't see any basis for this at all. This is just looking bad. This is just looking like another Goodika hypothesis, honestly. Which is, once you start looking at the details, it just kind of falls apart. As I said, secondary inferences. How he sort of gets there. And it just yeah, do not trust Goodika. Do not trust Goodika. You will regret it. Gee. Ugh. Yeah. Now I think there is. I think I'm going to be very honest here. I think that Egyptology could use some more creativity. Just because you do need that initial creativity to generate hypotheses, okay, and to see things that are maybe non-intuitive, okay. But yeah, there's some. I mean, some of the papers I've done have been very creative, okay? But a responsible scholar goes back, looks at his creative work, and basically says, okay, is the data really supporting this? That's you need rigor and creativity. The field does need more creativity, but it also still needs to retain the rigor as it does its creative endeavors. So, and as I said, I think Goodka went overboard. All creativity, no rigor. And whenever you start looking at his stuff, it just sort of falls apart. So, with that said, I hope that answered your question. It just, as I said, this just is not looking good. I mean, unless you mistyped it or something, you made a typo, and you don't seem to type to me that makes typos. So I'm really more leaning towards this is another wacky Goodika hypothesis. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very much appreciated, and I hope that provided some insight. Okay. I see historical gaming strategy here added a super chat. But the party is just warming up. You wish. You wish. Everyone is sort of dragging at this point. We've almost been going 4 hours.
Except Renzo threw it in without the question. Who would be the historical religion
you? Yeah, well. So we're going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to call it a night. So. Cole Walker, even I'm tired this time. Yeah, I am tired too. I didn't get much sleep last night. I was up at 7 just because I couldn't sleep, so it's been a long day for me. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Addison. Blah.
get the most unique super chat.
Yeah, my producer is right here. I do get the most unique super chats. Well, it's hard to know what to say about that.
Thank you for the super chat.
Other than thank you for the super chat. Hmm. Hmm.
Renzo said maybe I should have qualified also in what language too.
Perhaps you should have, Renzo. All right. As I said, one last quick non-super chat. And I am going to make it really quick, so if I don't find things quickly, I'm just going to call it. Okay. Thank you very much, clever boy. They're trying to keep me online here. They're tired, we're tired, and they're just keeping us going. They know I'll keep answering super chats until I hit that that off button. So They're just stringing me along here.
Right now, 1,000 Clever Boy has the last super chat. There's 10, there's 10. Do I hear 15?
Okay, I'm not seeing anything I really want to address at this point. Yeah, I'm trying to find something interesting to end with. We've kind of gone over a lot of the non-super chats already tonight. There wasn't a lot of them. We didn't have a lot of non-super chats tonight. So, nothing I really want to sort of pique in my interest. So, oh, I'll answer this one from Cole Walker. This will be the non-super chat of the night. How much to forge me a sword? afraid you can't afford it. Because, frankly, I don't have the equipment anymore. I no longer have my forge. I no longer have my anvil. Yeah, and I don't even have a decent place to do it at this point. But yes, I used to make swords. I used to be a knife smith. Did the whole 9 yards. Did the blades. Forged the blades. Sharpened them, polished them. Did the handles. Did a lot of jewelry work, like stones and metal inlay. So yeah, I've done a few very, very interesting knives. Even won a few awards. So yeah, I never did one with a gold handle. I did one with a bloodwood handle with silver inlay. I usually did combinations of wood. Most of my handles on my knives were a combination of wood and various metals and precious stones. I do have some, but not many. Let me post one. I think I can grab one here. I have one of my. Let's see here. Yeah, this might be a little difficult for me to retrieve at the moment. I do have some pictures. Hit me up next week for them. Okay? Popcorn is Monday, but next live stream, I'll have some pictures of my knives ready to show you if you're still interested. So, but yes, I do have some pictures. I don't have many pictures of the work I did, but I do have some. And some, as I said, I won a couple awards, so it was, I was reasonably good at it. So that's going to be the last question, and I think we've covered all the super chats. So we're going to call it a night at this point. So let's see, I can pull this off here. All right. He's somewhere post another super chat. Gee, thanks, Addison. Okay, so we're gonna probably call it a night here. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank everyone who contributed to super chat. You guys put food on our tables, and we really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Also, thank you for the interesting questions. We can't do this without you providing interesting questions, and we love great questions. I also want to thank our Patreon supporters who helped us, pay for our recent equipment disaster. We couldn't have done that without you, for sure. Uh, Fortunately, our NAS is now in good health, and that's all thanks to the Patreon supporters who basically support our equipment budget uh, with not nearly enough thanks or rewards. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who watch our videos. Okay, Addison. There you go. Thank you very much for the 99 cents super sticker just to keep me going. I also want to thank not only Addison Ware for his generosity tonight, but I also want to thank our subscribers who basically watch our videos, who like and dislike them, leave comments, and also spread the news of this channel to other venues. We have some people who are basically taking the message of ancient Egypt and the Bible to churches, to other social media platforms, and that helps get the message out. That helps this channel grow, and we really, really appreciate it. So, with that said, and notwithstanding any last second Addison Weir super chat, I want to wish you all a great, great night. Thank you very much for joining, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.